A new bill passing the House and the Senate could give you another lease on life.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
My guest tonight is Senator William Walaska. He has a personal life story that is quite poignant, to be honest with you, and it is that story that inspires his proposal to change an important law when it comes to drugs and chronic and perhaps terminal conditions. I think it's actually leaning more toward terminal than chronic, and he's dealt with one, is dealing with one, and is doing well with one based on an experience that he has had, and he wants that opportunity to grow for a lot of people in Rhode Island. So we'll talk about that as we get together with him coming up a little bit later on in the program at the end of this segment. Good evening. Nice to have you. Pleased to have you aboard. It's been a tough bit of news, though, in the world tonight, with the rundown top item, the Egypt air disaster. Now, we made an editorial decision here not to even run a story from one of our networks because, don't tell anybody, we produced this program in the mid-afternoon, and by the time you're seeing it at 7:30 on MyRI TV or Fox Providence at midnight, this thing could be changing. Of course, here are the headlines that we had to work with. Egypt airplane made sudden swerves. There's some tweeting going on by Egypt Air. They were kind of knocking down some of the information that had been out there regarding what might have been distributed in the Mediterranean and what might be recoverable. It's one of those situations. I think like you, I'm certainly not exclusive in this thought. Prayers for the families and the victims, obviously, of this air crash. It gives us all pause. It shouldn't make us panic. At the same time, security is of utmost importance, and those TSA lines that we've got here in America right now that have been extended probably will be extended even further. The technology race between terrorists and bombs and what the security people can do to prevent it seems to be ongoing. That's an assumption, of course, that it's a terrorist act, and we probably shouldn't be doing that on any kind of official basis, but it's just you and me talking. Of course, it didn't take Donald Trump very long to tweet out that it was a terrorist act. That's the kind of discipline we want in a president, don't you think? Think some good thoughts for those families. I don't know what kind of thoughts you could think, but prayers are important. Moving on, the president has put pen to paper on a really, really, really provocative piece of legislation. The headline here tells the story, and it's going to affect us locally, according to this one as well. Here's the background on it, then we'll have a little discussion about it.
Carlos Barillas often works more than 40 hours a week managing a McDonald's restaurant in Washington, D.C.
I think like about 50, 55 something.
But he doesn't get paid extra, earning a flat salary instead. Barillas is one of 4.2 million workers that could soon be eligible for overtime pay under a new rule issued by the Obama administration.
Mark my words, the benefit's going to be beyond the compensation. It's going to be that maybe we're getting things right.
The annual salary threshold at which companies can deny overtime pay is currently $23,660. Under the new regulations, that figure doubles to nearly $47,500. Barillas says getting paid for OT would change his life.
And the kids always ask for, I want this, I want that. And with the extra money, I'm gonna buy them whatever they want.
But many groups that represent small businesses say the burden on companies would be too high, and the new rule might actually hurt, not help, the economy.
The Department of Labor is selling a theory, but it's really bait and switch.
The National Retail Federation says many businesses will convert salaried workers into hourly ones.
Many employees may actually see less money as a result of this.
But the White House says a new overtime law is way overdue.
Thinking about this, it's a pretty wide margin, right? $23,000 to $47,000. But those managers and salaried employees that work in places like fast food joints and the like might just get a bump if they're near that $47,000 threshold. So, right? So if you're making $42,000, $43,000, $44,000 and now they can't stretch you until 47 plus, maybe you get a bump to 48. Then they work your fanny off. I would like to see how this thing bears out, but I'm not inclined generally to say that these kinds of moves by what is clearly a liberal administration are the best thing. At the same time, there's a fairness issue here, And corporate America is no benign organization, and certainly not benevolent, right? So let's keep our eyes on this one. Looking forward to talking with you on the radio about this in the next few days, because I'm sure you all have an interesting point of view. Don't forget weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRO. Front page in the Providence Journal today, the potential for, I know that's kind of gross, right? Anytime you use the term incest, that's not a spelling error, that's a purposeful thing. You look at the headline here and you can see why. Grants that funnel back into lobbying. Now look, the good news is that there's a white light being focused on what's known as this community grant thing, right? The things that are above the legislative grants. And it's really important that the public teach itself the difference between the two. These community action grants and the like, for the most part, are pretty viable and reasonable and productive uses of taxpayer money. They need to be in a budget, independently reviewed, independently approved by an up and down vote and debate on the legislature. That money that's sent to an entity, you know, say an organization gets a few $100,000 and they're backfilling $50,000 or $80,000 to a lobbyist to perpetuate the cycle, that obviously is a no-no. I'm not sure that's what's happened, you know, with these grants, and so they're kind of pairing through, and I will trust the government audit of this. The real problem, though, and I keep coming back to you, is not the big grants. They'll figure out how to create transparency and a little bit more individual scrutiny for that. They have to, because the pressure's on. It's the legislative grants, the little ones from $500 to $5,000 that total completely $2 million out of the Joint Committee on Legislative Services budget. It's a crime. It's criminal. It's corrupt. It's a disease. It's the essence of the authority and power structure that goes on. It is the cheesy opportunity for a legislator to take their big fat $500 check to the Little League and smile for the Valley Breeze, hi, and you, because you don't know any better, sit there and think, wow, they're really connected. They're bringing home the bacon. That $2 million needs to go now. Know the difference. All right. Phil Mickelson has a problem. Did you see this? Phil has to kick back to the SEC some $900,000+. Seems that Phil had a couple of guys that were muscling him for bets he had to pay off. And so these guys learned about an opportunity to make some dough, and he dumped $2.4 million of stock into a transaction, profiting $900,000. He's returning the money to the SEC in a settlement with them. He's not accused of a crime. The other guys have that problem. But it's a bigger problem for Phil. While his sponsors are sticking with him and his brand remains very popular, and I'm certainly a fan of his game and his disposition and the way he treats fans, somebody ought to create an intervention here. Phil, by the way, with some of the people I know in the golf business, I've heard off the record some significant stories about Phil Mickelson and his appetite for gambling on the golf course. You know, your $10 Nassau is hardly comparative to the kind of money he wagers when he plays. He has a gambling problem, and somebody better help him with it. That's a big deal. All righty, on our subject today, the idea of experimental drugs. Here is a headline that kind of really, I think, probably says it all, but there's so much more to the story. Senator Bill Walaska is here and feeling well, correct?
Thank you, Dan. I feel very well.
You've got plenty of time here to talk about your battle and what you've learned here, but in essence, the House and the Senate have passed a bill that broadens the scope for medication. Yes. Give me the executive summary, then we'll expand.
Well, right now, Rhode Island law requires insurers to cover experimental or off-label drugs for cancer only. My legislation, which has just passed the Senate, requires the insurers to cover other life-threatening terminal diseases besides cancer. MS, ALS, MD, all of those particular diseases would now be, insurance would now be required to cover those particular diseases for experimental drugs.
All right, well, that's a pretty good summary of the whole thing. When we come back, Bill will tell his story. We'll talk about the expense, the issues with the state, the FDA, you know, the whole industry of health insurance. Stay with us. Word. One more headline on the subject matter that Senator Walaska and I are talking about here. Let's start from the beginning. you're feeling well, but you had a really tough diagnosis, correct?
Yes, I did. About 3 years ago, I started to feel very weak and very ill, and I couldn't figure out what the problem was. And I went to my regular physician. He did some blood work, and it didn't come back very well. He said, "Sit here. We're going to do it one more time. There's got to be a mistake," but it wasn't. He sent me to Miriam and said, "I want you to see this oncologist." The oncologist looked me in the eye and says, "I'm admitting you." And I was in the hospital for about 3 months with leukemia, CLL, chronic lymphomic leukemia. And the chemo seemed to work, and I got a little better. But then last summer, it came back with a vengeance. And I was treated with chemo. I had a couple of rounds of chemo, and the physician said to me, "Bill, this chemo's not working, and it's killing you. We got to get you to Dana-Farber and see what we can do." I talked to the physician up there who specialized in this particular illness, and he wasn't a whole lot he thought he could do, and the prognosis was pretty dire. So I left there. We went out to dinner. I had a nice Johnny Walker Blue. I figured, what the heck? And anyway, long story short, I went back to Miriam, and my doctor said, "There's a drug out there. It's still experimental, but I'll see if I can get you into the program to try it." Something called Imbruvica. And I started to take that drug about 4 months ago, and I was down to 120 some odd pounds. And, you know, I went to the service station, the self-service station. I couldn't even take the gas cap off the car. That's how weak you get when your blood is so low, red blood especially. But anyway, long story short, within weeks of taking this drug, I started to gain weight, feel better, and you know, I take it every day, 3 capsules, and so far it's working. And we'll see how long it continues to work.
What drove, other than, you know, a doctor who keeps his eyes and ears open, what drove them to say this drug? Was there a lot of clinical performance on it, even though it's not fully FDA approved, correct?
No, not yet. It's still experimental stages.
Which means that the category of experimental drug means what?
Well,
it seems obvious, but what are the legal connotations?
Well, essentially, it has not yet been approved for use, but that particular indication by the FDA. They have shown to be of somewhat of use for the particular indication, but not yet approved by the FDA. But it is in medical literature that this drug has been useful.
And there are stages to that final approval, correct?
Yes. It's a long, arduous, very expensive process to get FDA approval. And by the time, and with some people, by the time that process comes to fruition, it's late. Because these are life-threatening, debilitating diseases. These are diseases that you'll die from in a matter of a short period of time.
You were covered. Your health insurance.
Covered, yes.
Are you on the state plan?
Yes.
The state plan covered your insurance.
Yes.
I mean, your insurance covered the drug.
My insurance covers the treatment. Yes.
And so you came to what understanding about the big picture through this whole thing? First of all, glad you're doing well.
Thank you.
Do they have before I get to that, is the prognosis good, or is it just kind of like day by day? Holy cow, it's working. I'm sure your data is being entered into the computer as the FDA is reviewing this, correct?
Oh yes, before I get the drug right out at Rhode Island Hospital every month. It's not available in pharmacies, obviously, and I am asked a series of questions and the different problems you have with the drug. There are some side effects, but it's working. Well, I guess to answer your question is, my cancer's not going to go away. I still have it. The doctor said it's there. It's probably there forever. What this drug is doing is keeping it somewhat under control. Okay. It's not expanding anymore. It's actually contracted, but it's still there. And this drug may be good for a year, 2 years, 3 years. They don't know how long, because it hasn't been in use that long. So I'm hoping that something else comes along also.
Of course. Well, listen, I admire your ability to confront the situation directly and your sense of humor about it, because, you know, terminal diagnosis is probably the one thing that everyone will eventually get and nobody wants to deal with. And so I think that's admirable. You come to an understanding, though, that in a way you're privileged. Cancer's covered, other diseases are not.
I was fortunate enough to
Isn't that strange to say,
have,
right?
When I say I'm fortunate to have cancer, yeah, I guess based on the current law,
right.
I guess you're right. But that's why my legislation is so important, and also it's in the House side, because other people ought to have the same right that I have. I mean, if it wasn't for that Imbruvica or the doctor putting me on the program, I would not be here today. I was going to be gone by the end. I was planning on New Year's Day. Christmas, New Year's, pretty much gone. That was my plan. I was preparing both spiritually and economically, because I was told you've got a short timeline.
All right, when we come back, we'll talk about what Bill wants to get done with this new law and what roadblocks or challenges there might be. Stay with us. Welcome back. Senator William Walaska is here. Pretty riveting conversation about facing his diagnosis, which was not good, with leukemia that Bill is challenged with, but which is now, is it fair to say, in check with this new drug for the time being? One day at a time, right?
Say in check, it's one day at a time, under control.
So you come to this recognition that this cancer drug covered under experimental definition, but cancer really seems to be the leading disease in this marketplace. Did you hear from others saying, congratulations, Bill, but what about me? What brought you to say, hey, listen, I got to do something about this?
Well, first let me say the treatment I've got was exceptional. There's so much support for people with cancer and these terminal diseases in this state and in others, during the farm, let's say, is incredible. So I have had so many people come, friends, relatives, other political people, say, Bill, wow, that's so good. They've been really good. Matter of fact, right around Christmas time last year, when things looked very, very dire, some people had a little get-together right around Christmas. I just assumed it was a little Christmas party or that sort of thing at the restaurant, but then I saw all these political people there. I saw my friends there, and I said, this is a going-away party. This is not a Christmas party. It was a going-away party. Even some patriots were there. So it was very nice, but I said, oh, my God. But, yes, people have come up and said, because I've been very active, say, with ALS. I'm very proud to say 2 years ago I got the Advocate of the Year award for ALS. That's a death sentence, as you know. So, yes, I've had people say, my God, if there's something out there for us, is there some drugs that we can utilize? And if you read articles all the time, and I have so many here, where people trying to get into these programs can't get into them, number one, because they've only allowed so many people, and number two, it's unaffordable. These drugs are very, very expensive. For whatever reason, they're very expensive, but they're life-saving drugs. So there should be no reason why we can't let people into these programs and get it paid for. Because that's what insurance is for.
Have you done the research as to why cancer had an edge in this conversation with the health insurance industry?
I don't know why. No, I can't. I wish I could answer that. No, it was a number of years ago that they applied this to cancer. I guess because it's just cancer is so prevalent.
Right.
And if people understand cancer, that big C, they don't even mention the word cancer. Many people, it's the C, They don't. They avoid the use of the word.
I get it. So what's the reaction? First of all, this bill passed the House, 33-1. Who voted no, by the way?
Well, the Senate was 37 to 31 to 1. One person did vote against it. And I started to ask him what his reasons were, but before we got to talk about it, something else.
Was it technical in nature as opposed to philosophical in nature?
I'm not sure. I don't know what his reason was.
Who was it? Who voted against it?
A senator, I believe Pagliarini from Middletown.
Really?
I believe it was he that voted.
He's been here, and I'd like to know why he did that. There must be some reason. I'm perplexed. But it's passed through the House as well. Is the governor not signed it yet?
I don't think just yet. We haven't had a signing ceremony.
Are you worried that the governor will or won't sign it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think there'd be any problem with
okay,
the governor
so really, in a way, it's congratulations. It's procedural at this point, but you want people to know. How is the insurance industry reacting to this? Have you had a lot of pushback?
No, believe it or not, I have not. I've not had a lot of pushback. We had one letter from one physician that just was concerned about the FDA approval. That's all. One person. Other than the insurance companies, the different groups, no pushback
well,
at all.
look, insurance companies
This is one of the easiest bills I've ever had get through the Senate.
In a way, I'm surprised about that because insurance companies are in the business of making money and having to extend themselves for what are not only experimental but probably very expensive drugs is not their bailiwick. Well, have you analyzed whether or not this will help or hurt the insurance market, whether companies will bail out? Has anybody said to you, hey, Bill, nice idea, but you better understand about the marketplace choices out there, you could lose some carriers.
Well, this is not a mandate. See, these drugs are already being prescribed for many of these drugs are already being prescribed for other uses. It's just that they're not approved for a particular use, whatever it might be, with that particular disease.
Explain that.
Gets a little, I know, it gets a little complicated, but these drugs are being prescribed now for other uses. For instance, this drug Imbruvic, as I understand it, some articles I read, someone was originally looking at it for brain cancer. And they were using it for that, but it didn't quite work, and then someone found out it was good for CLL, and all of a sudden it becomes in use for cancer. But these drugs are already in use, but maybe for other indications, and maybe not the indication, the life-threatening one. So I know it sounds complicated, but they are in use, and the drug companies are paying for some of these drugs now for other uses.
Well, the drug companies are selling them.
Well,
they're not paying.
They've
invested in the research.
I meant to say you picked up. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The drug companies are selling. The insurers are. Insurers are paying for some of these drugs now. I didn't mean to say the drug companies are paying. No.
So I guess the only question I have, and I completely support your idea, and I'm glad it passed.
Appreciate it.
But you know, did you do the homework? Did you get that feedback to be able to predict the insurance marketplace here in Rhode Island? Or they're just kind of taking the hit and saying, you know what, you're right, it's the right thing to do, we shall broaden experimental drugs for every major disease out there where there's a specific, and is there a specific diagnosis, by the way, that you have to have? Does it have to be terminal, or can it be chronic?
Well, life-threatening terminal disease, yeah.
But is there a criteria to determine what that is? Is
Well,
there a timeline? God forbid, you got
that's
90 days. I mean, right? Originally, that's what your press release says. You got 90 days. I mean, is there a timetable?
No, there's no timeline in there. I mean, if
Okay.
a physician determines that it's life-threatening, debilitating, then the coverage is there. But no, I haven't done. The insurance companies have been on board from the beginning, and I think some of it is. You know what?
Why were the insurance companies on board from the beginning?
I suspect maybe. Listen, maybe it's. I hate to say this. It sounds naive, but maybe it's more altruistic than you can believe. I mean, they are drugs that save lives. These drugs are out there now, and eventually many are going to be approved by the FDA anyway, and are going to be in the marketplace.
Have they did a cost analysis that getting on some of these experimental drugs will
yes, they have.
will save them money up until
it
the
might
person's
very well.
passing?
It might very well. And I mean, you believe I taught economics. I understand cost analysis very well.
Well, I think most people watching this are going, geez,
yeah.
I hope we don't see some insurance bailout or some other kind of financial pushback from the insurance companies. If you've done your homework and they're on board, I'm sure the medical community's on board.
Medical community's on board. The insurers are on board right from the beginning.
All right. So people who have diseases where in the past perhaps they were told they can't, they should advocate now. That's your message, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell your doctor, remind your doctor and your insurance company that any minute now, this is going to be a wider net.
Absolutely. I've got phone calls from people. I just think the other day some woman called me, and it was regarding her husband who had some terminal illness.
Keep us up to date on the legislation, and
thank you.
I'm glad you're doing well, and
thank
best
you
of
very
luck.
much.
Bill, thank you.
I appreciate
Good
it.
piece of work there. Final word when we come back. Stay with us. Hey, listen, during the break, I understand that the information about Senator Walaska's bill via the House is not exactly accurate. The Senate overwhelmingly passed his bill. The House has its own version, which is different than the House's bill and than the Senate's bill. And so we'll clarify that for you in the next few days. But the essence is, it's a good bill. We'll talk to you. Bye.